Now I think that we have completed more or less the server side programming or the API programming. Now we should move into the client side development. As I have told you earlier that we will be using AngularJS for the client side development. Let me first get the AngularJS from the NuGet package manager. Angular this is the one, and we are not using the AngularJS core, we are using AngularJS. Get it. The installation of AngularJS has been successful. We'll also be using AngularJS routing, so let's install that as well. We have successfully installed the AngularJS. Now let's move on to the development part. First, I'll create a folder. I'll call it to do scripts, and I'll create a JavaScript file called app to do list. I'd rather call it app to do rather than to do list. App to do. Now let us begin the development process. This is a truthy expression. Use strict. The use strict literal syntax, it instructs the JavaScript compiler to run in a strict mode, and when for example it does not allow the use of the undeclared variables, and then it also gives exception and errors, for example when we are trying to access the global object. We should use strict syntax so that we write a better code. So angular.module, it's called app to do, and it won't have any dependency as of now. So that is our Angular app. So we have to include this Angular script file in our project. We will do that by first including it in the bundle.config. Here we have in our JavaScript part or JS area, we will include the AngularJS first. Scripts. It is not necessary to use the minimized version of AngularJS at this level, because the bundle.config will automatically minimize the scripts. That is one script that I want to include. The other one that will soon require would be the Angular route. And now our custom script file, it is inside to do script / app to do.js. So in order to include that or bootstrap the AngularJS, let's go to the views folder. If you are familiar with the ASP.NET form development, then there is master page, so that controls the basic layout of the pages, so it brings about uniformity, consistency. Similarly, in the MVC there is the share folder, and inside the share folder there is a layout, and that layout is more or less similar to the master pages in ASP.NET. So let's bootstrap the Angular in this layout.cshtml. I'd like to bootstrap it here in the body part. So ng app, it is going to be app to do. That is it. Now since we require to view application in the browser, I'll go to change the properties, because initially we had set it to don't open a page, wait for a request for external application, but now we'll set it to current page. This is the landing page. Now when we go to inspect, let's go to body, it has added a ENG scope. This indicates that the bootstrapping of the AngularJS was successful. Let's proceed with further development. Let us write our first controller. AngularJS also follows the MVC pattern. We are going to write the controller in the script file that we had just created. So let's go get there. We'll create a controller that will validate the user or send the username and password to the web API and retrieve the token from the web API if successful. Otherwise, it will just display an error message. .controller. We'll call this login controller. Login controller. And now let's define the controller. This angular.module is a directive. Controller is a directive. Here we are saying that currently the AngularJS script does not have any dependencies, but we need to pass the username and password to the web API and also retrieve the token from there. We need a HTTP service that is provided by the AngularJS. So let's use that. So we'll use the HTTP service. Let's declare a VM. It will be this login VM dot login equals to function HTTP token method post data will be input that we'll get from the user. A little later we'll just develop the interface for user to provide his or her credentials into the system. So let us initialize the login VM login info user info. So login VM dot user info, currently it is blank, so that is it. And headers, type, if you remember it from the Postman experimentation, so this is exactly the same that we did in the Postman. Here we are only doing it in code. we write the callback functions. Then what ESTTP does is it basically returns a promise. So the promise does not mean that it gets you the result, but then it assures you that something will be returned. It is not sure whether you will get the exact result or any error response, but will assure you that you will get something after making a call. Let's write the function when it is successful. The other function for when there is a failure. So here let's just do console.log response data console.log error. Now let's develop a page where the user can actually do the login. Let us create the login page. So let's go to the Solution Explorer, Views, Home. There is index.cshtml. We'll convert this into the login page. Let's get rid of the HTML and let's have div class equals to container. I'm using the bootstrap classes in order to style the pages, and we do not need to explicitly add the bootstrap because when we created the template, bootstrap is automatically added into the application. Form id equals to form login ng controller is our login controller, and let's have div class equals to form group, then label sp4 user name input type equals to email HTML5 id equals to username name equals to username ng model equals to latest. So login controller as VM ng model equals to VM dot login info dot username ng required ng min length, let's say min length is 10, class equals to form group, label sp4 password input type equals to password id equals to password name equals to password class equals to form control. Let me decorate this with a class as well, class from control password ng model equals to vm dot login info dot password ng required ng min length equals to 8. Now let's put a submit button, class from group button, or let's call a submit button, input type equals to submit, value equals to login, class equals to btn primary, and that is it for the time being. Let us run this and let's see the result. Before I forget to include the controller, let me include the controller in the bundle config. Okay, I do not need to do that. Let's first do a little change. Form ng submit equals to vm dot login, so we'll put this outside of this, control V, it, so we have the login screen. So let's provide abc@xyz.com and the password was abc12345. Login. Let's see if we get into the controller. We are not being able to get into the controller, so let's look at the markup. In app Angular bootstrap properly, login bootstrap properly, but our login submit is not working. Let us look if there is an error. app-todo.js vm.login, and that is vm. Sorry, I missed the braces. Let's refresh the page. So let's do a c12345. Okay, we are still not getting there. Okay, we did actually get in there. We have gotten an error, so let's look at the error. So let us look if we have the proper name and password. Let us look if the model binding is functioning properly. So console.log login vm dot user info dot username plus password plus login vm dot user info dot password. So email, let's save it, let's refresh the page. abc@xyz.com, abc12345, a capital. There is the issue. The email and password are not defined. So let's fix that. So I can see one issue there. So I have set it at username and Here I have that. Okay, that is username, that looks correct to me. Login info. Right, it is user info, not the login info. So let's grab that. Control V, Control V, save it. Let's look if there are some other thing that I'm missing. Username and password. Username and password, that looks correct to me now. abc@xyz.com, abc12345. Let's hit login, and we are actually being able to bind properly, so it looks correct to me. But then I'm getting an error. It is actually server error, but we might get misguided that this is related to AngularJS. It is not related to AngularJS. Let's look into the issue. First, let's use Postman once again. Let us try to use Postman to log in into the system. Here we are. Content type, body grant password, send. We are getting it here. Means I must have stuffed up something. Okay, this is not email, this is username. Control V. So now try that once again. ABC12345. Login. Bingo. And here we have. We are now able to log in into the system by using the AngularJS. I usually prefer to write my controllers in the different file, in a separate file, so that the management becomes easier. Let me do that here as well. So let me add a JavaScript file. I'll call it the login controller. And paste it here. Since this is a controller only, I'm getting rid of the dependencies part, and here I no longer require this. I can get rid of that as well. But before I forget, let me include the login controller.js in my bundle config. It is login controller, and let me add a comma. Then okay, that's done. Let me run it once again. F12 to bring out the debug window. So again we are getting the token. I have separated the controller from the main AngularJS app. Now there should be some mechanism for the users to register themselves to use the service. Let's do that next. Here let's create a button. So that is going to be a row, div class form group input type equals to button, value equals to register, class equals to btn or link this time, and when ng click, we'll do vm dot register. So now we need to write the vm.register function. So login vm.register equals to function. This function will do nothing but take the user to a new registration page. We'll use the location service. For that, we need to get access to that location service. So let's do that. Location dot path slash register. So now let's create the register. So let's go to Solution Explorer. To create the registration page, we need to get into the home controller and then create public action result register view bag dot title equals to registration page, return view. Now add view. Register. Okay. So let us write the markup for this. Class equals to container ng controller login controller as VM, then form name equals to form registration ng submit equals to vm.register. We have not written this function as of yet. We have this register function. We'll call this register user. So group label sp4 first name input class equals to form control id equals to first name ng required ng min length equals to 8 ng model equals to vm dot registration info, which we have not defined yet, dot first name so let me pause the video while I write the markup. So this is the markup. Now let us write the Angular controller for it. We need not write a new controller because we are using the login controller itself, but we need to write this function register user, and then we also need to define vm.registration info. Let's do that. Login vm.registration info equals to blank. Login vm.register user equals to function http so the URL is API account / register method post data equals to login vm.registration info. Now let's write the callback function. We can simply write this function, the failure function. Log could not register the user, please try later. And we will redirect the user to the login page after that. So we will do the path Control K, Control D to properly format the code. It looks correct to me. Let me place a breakpoint in the register function. Register. So this is the one. Let me put a breakpoint here. So let's click the register. It is using the Angular routing, but we are not using Angular routing as of now. So instead of location, I would rather use window. So let's change it to window, and then this will be window.location.href equals to, now we'll be using MVC routing. So let's look at how MVC routing is configured. So that will be in app start config. So the first one will be the controller. This is the MVC controller, not the Angular controller. Then the action. Our controller is still the home controller and our action is the register. Let's write that. First it's home controller and register action. Now here as well we would like to do window.location. Let's run it again, and let me make a small change here. Sol.log inside the registration function. Now it works. So let me bring the debug window by pressing F12. DEF LMN DEF at xyz.com. Let me put the same password. Let's hit the register button. So we are actually getting into the registration function, and it seems we are also hitting the register function inside the account controller. We got bad request. Let us look into that. So let's hit register again. We are into that function. First name is null. The model state is invalid. Let us look why is the first name null. Login controller. First name, middle name. So it requires camel caching. That is it. However, as you can notice that the properties in the models and the view models are defined in Pascal caching, but in JavaScript, camel case is the standard. So we need to convert from Pascal case to camel caching, and then that we can do by using the JSON serializer. So let's do that first. Go to Web API config. Here config.formatters.json formatter.serializer settings.contract resolver equals to new camel case names contract resolver. That will convert the Pascal caching in our web API to camel caching when sending the data across to the client. Now let's run it once again. Now let us look at that model. We still have first name null, password is correct, confirm password is correct, but first name is still null. So let us look, why is this giving an error? Right, there is because the min length is set to 8, this element will be invalid. So let's make it 3 and let's have a look, and I'm sure it is going to function now. Let's hit register, and there we are. Now let's hit continue. Okay, I think we had a successful registration of the user. Let's check that in the database, or in fact we can try to log in using the that credential, and it was df at xyz.com abc 1 2 3 4 5. So login, bingo, and here we have the information. We do not want to display the username and password in the console window, so let's hide that first. Get rid of this line altogether. Now I'm going to introduce another concept in AngularJS, and that is called the service. So here we were using the HTTP service. These were the built-in service defined in the AngularJS framework. Now we'll be defining our custom services, and we'll be encapsulating the HTTP calls to the web API in that service, and this controller will only access the custom service. They won't be accessing HTTP and other information. Let me create a new JavaScript file. Let me call it a to-do service. Before I start explaining about the services, let me first write few lines of codes. So I am writing a function that will validate the user against the username and password provided. The username in our case is the email, and password is the password. Let me copy it from the login controller, copy the function from the login controller. I'm returning the promise. So let me change this to appropriate values. So this is going to be email, and this is going to be password, and now let's go to the login controller. In the login controller, now we will inject the to-do service, which we shall use to log in into the application. Instead of making direct HTTP call, now we will call the service function to do service, dot login vm dot user info dot username login vm dot user info dot password then function response function response console.log response console.log error during validation. So now let us run this. Okay, we have got an error here. Let me try to fix the error first. It looks all correct to me. Okay, I have found out the issue. This has to be in the lowercase. Let me check it again. Let's log in, and there you are. So it sent us the access token which expires on 17th of July, and it was issued on Sunday 3rd of July. The access token is this, and the timestamp is this one. So token type is bearer, and the username is abc@xyz.com. Now let us talk a bit about the AngularJS services. While writing the controller function, I had used the HTTP service, which is an AngularJS built-in service. I had not talked much about it as the primary focus was on the controller, data binding, among others. For example, we use this login function to validate the credentials provided by the user in the login screen. When we use the HTTP service, we do not, or any service for example, we do not actually get the actual result, but what we get is a promise. And I have talked about promise a little earlier as well. We can actually use the promise object to specify what to do when the request succeeds or when it fails. So here in this service, we are not putting any business logic in place. We are simply returning whatever we get. So promises in AngularJS are objects that contain a reference to functions to call when something fails or succeeds. So in AngularJS, this queue function is of importance. So promises in AngularJS are provided by this built-in queue service. This $Q service allows us to work with asynchronous functions and use their return values when execution has been completed. In AngularJS, a deferred represents the result of an asynchronous operation. It exposes an interface that can be used to notify or signal the change of state. So here we are creating by queue.defer, we are actually creating a promise object, and this promise object will be resolved. The asynchronous call is successful, we resolve it, and when it fails, we reject it. So this is how we implement a service in AngularJS. Here I'll be writing few more services that will be used throughout our application. So let's do that next. So let me bring the registration into this service as well. this dot register equals to function registration info. This is going to be registration info as we do not require the login VM, and here we are doing this, and here we are doing this. In our application, we are simply moving the function, the HTTP calls that were in the controller to the service. But in real world scenarios, the services will contain the complex business logic operations, and the controller will only interact with the models. And here we are only learning the concept of service. Let's rewrite this registration service. We will be using to do service dot register, and here we'll be passing login VM dot registration info, and since it is returning a promise, we are creating the callback functions. So when the registration is successful, we would like to redirect the user to the login screen. And when it fails, we will log the information in the console. The user, we won't be logging this information in console in the production environment, so we need to provide information to the user. So let's define a variable. Let us define login VM dot error message. So let's populate that. Login VM dot error message equals to could not register user, please try later. Similarly, here we will do something similar. So that is going to be could not validate the user. Now let's go to the registers CSS HTMLs. Here div class row let us also define another field, login VM dot is error equals to false. Here login VM dot is error equals to true. Let's make this same here, and now let's go to our markup. Let's do something similar in the login screen. Oh, that would be here. So let's run it. Let us try with the wrong password. So this is not resolving. Sorry, I missed it, so I had to use the mustache symbol. Okay, so that is taken care of. Okay, now we have the error message as well.